I moved into a small apartment building last summer. It was a cheap two-bedroom place and was really my only option considering my low-paying job at the time. The building was very clearly not well taken care of, and neither was the room. There was a buildup of mold in several areas, and the place honestly just looked like it was falling apart. Of all these things, though, the one thing that stood out the most was the lack of other residents. I'd lived in a couple of apartment complexes before moving into this one, and rarely would a room even be available. However, at this place, almost all of the rooms were still available for rent. It was a small complex with only 8 rooms, but during the time I was there, only 2 rooms were occupied, mine and an older couple's on the first floor. My room was on the 3rd floor, leaving the middle and top floor completely empty. But those floors never truly felt empty. Having lived there for a month at a time, I'd heard on multiple occasions people talking below me. I always believed it was just the older couple, as they were the only ones living below me. Though strangely, I'd only ever hear a woman's voice, never a man's. And to make things stranger, I'd be able to hear them pretty clearly, even though they were 2 stories below me. It would always sound as though the woman was muttering to herself indistinctly. It would give me the creeps sometimes when I would wake up and hear the woman muttering to herself below me, but I thought perhaps she was sleepwalking and maybe the vents to my room were connected to theirs, allowing for the sound to travel. But everything only got worse as time went on. 2 months in, with nobody else moving in, I was walking up the stairs to my room. As I walked past the 2nd floor, I noticed a door to one of the rooms was open. My curiosity got the better of me, and I took a couple steps towards the doorway to look inside. It was dark and empty, which is exactly what you'd expect of a vacant room, but I got a really bad feeling the closer I got to the doorway. I ended up just continuing upstairs to my room. Later that night, though, I was taking the trash down and noticed the door was closed. It was definitely weird, but I didn't know what to really think. I knew nobody lived there, so what could it even be? Maybe the owner of the building was working on the room or something. That was the only thing I could think of. Anyway, that night I went to bed early with a clear mind, but woke up sometime in the middle of the night hearing the woman muttering below me again. Having seen the door below me open earlier, I was more curious about the mysterious woman. This time, I got out of bed, being sure not to make much noise, and leaned my ear against the cold wooden floorboards. Her indistinct mumbling sounded close, but was also more of a whisper. I knew there was no way a whisper could sound so close if it was coming from the old couple's room on the 1st floor. At that moment, realizing this, I began to get nervous. Part of me wanted to go downstairs to see if the door was open again, but I knew I was way too fearful to do that now. Sitting in bed again, thinking, I started to hear the woman walking around slowly, still talking to herself. It seemed like she was just walking in random patterns in the room below me. After a few minutes, though, she stopped very suddenly. It's safe to say I was terrified. The woman suddenly going silent almost made it worse, as I no longer knew where she was or what she was doing. But this night would go on to be far more fear-inducing. I sat in bed, wide awake, for 30 minutes, beginning to wonder if the woman had somehow quietly left or was possibly just standing in the same spot for the past half hour. Either way, I was too scared to sleep, and that's when I heard the floor creaking again, as someone was walking slowly across the floor. However, this time it was coming from above me. Soft creaks in the floor slowly made their way through the upstairs room before stopping directly above my bed. Several seconds of terrifying silence passed before the woman's soft whispering came from above me. Then, she let out one loud, aching scream, almost sounding as if it were right in front of my face. The room then fell silent again. I was basically in tears, holding my head and trying not to completely freak out. But how could I not? I stayed up until dawn, then made arrangements with my family to stay with them for a while. I paid a fee to end my lease and moved in with my parents while I looked for a new place. The only time I went back was to move my stuff into the moving truck, and as I loaded up one of the last boxes, the old couple came out to say goodbye. I'd never really talked to them aside from simple greetings when we were going in or out, but they strangely seemed to be really sad that I was leaving. I'm not sure if they ever experienced anything that I had, but the only thing I could focus on during our brief conversation was how distinct the old lady's accent was and that it sounded nothing at all like the woman I had heard mumbling. After that, I didn't know what to think other than how glad I was to be moving out. All I can say is that I hope I never hear that unknown woman's whispers ever again. Although it happened quite some time ago, I'm still bothered by this experience. Around September of last year, I spent the night at my grandparents' home. That evening, everything seemed to be going relatively normally. We ate my grandmother's delicious steak, watched TV, and then looked at some old photos. When night came around, I went to the guest bedroom, which had been my room before we used to live with them. At around 2 o'clock, I put my laptop up to play some music as I got ready for bed, so that I might doze off. Now, let me tell you, there were a few paranormal occurrences when we used to live there, but I wouldn't characterize any of them as horrible or frightening. For instance, I've always been a light sleeper and would wake up if someone even walked quietly on the wooden floors outside of my room. This happened a few times, waking up to soft footsteps in the hallway by my room, but my grandparents assured me later that they were not up at all. One time I even went to check, but all the doors were closed and nobody seemed to be awake. Anyway, the general layout of my room was slightly odd compared to other rooms. There was a corner in this room that led to a small hallway before you reached the entrance door, so from the bed you couldn't see the door, only the small hallway leading to the door. I must have dozed off pretty quickly, though, because I woke up suddenly without even remembering falling asleep. It was around 4 in the morning, and I felt extremely tired. This was a little unusual because every time I'd wake up in the middle of the night, I'd usually feel pretty awake and good, which was often the reason for my body waking me up. But this time I was really tired. I didn't hear anything that woke me up, but since I was so tired, I knew I hadn't just woken up on my own. I looked in the direction of the short hallway with my half-opened eyes, seeing nothing. Although it was dark, I put my head back on the pillow and closed my eyes. I laid there for a few minutes in silence, on the brink of sleep, before I heard the awful sound of my bedroom door closing. I shot open my eyes and raised my body up from the pillow, staring into the empty darkness of the hallway. I must have been frozen in that position for a whole minute before I got out of bed and went over to the door. Nothing was there, but I knew something was not right. I always kept the door shut, so who opened it? The thought made me shiver, and I quickly locked the door, then hopped back into bed. I told myself that it must have been one of my grandparents, though I couldn't come up with a reason for them opening and closing my door. Trying to forget it, I closed my eyes again and laid silently. Just as I did, loud running footsteps came from outside the room, coming towards the door. They sounded like heavy, barefoot steps, stopping abruptly at the room door. I waited, completely horrified and in a total state of shock. A few long, anxious seconds passed before I again heard the door aggressively slam shut. This time, having seen the door already closed not even a minute prior, and never hearing it open, I was stuck in a panic. My heart was beating rapidly, yet I felt like I was too scared to move. I stayed sitting up in my bed all night until morning. I hadn't told my grandparents so as not to frighten them, and instead just made an excuse to leave early and head home. A few months later, though, I was sleeping over at a friend's place, trying to fall asleep while lying on the floor. My eyes closed and my body facing away from the door, I heard it again, the door closing, but this time softly. I looked over at my friend, but he was already sound asleep and hadn't heard a thing. When I asked him in the morning, surprisingly, he hadn't heard it either. I haven't heard it since then, and I've never heard it in my own home. I have virtually no idea what I've been experiencing, but I have a very strong feeling that I'm being watched by a paranormal entity. I still don't understand the significance of the already closed door closing again, but I would really appreciate it if someone could explain it to me, or even share with me a method to get rid of it. Because even still today, I lay in bed paranoid every night, fearing that I may wake up to something horrible. I've had a lot of inexplicable experiences in my life, some that even today, I can't wrap my head around. My first thought isn't necessarily that it's paranormal, as I'm not sure if I believe in that kind of thing. I have an open mind, but I don't buy into things that easily. Most things that happen, I blame on my mind playing tricks on me, sleep deprivation, or simply the fact that it could be a mental illness that has gone undiagnosed. There is one moment, though, or I suppose a few moments, that have been on my mind for some time now. One happened while I was in the shower. As water poured over my head, I heard my brother yell my name. The second time was louder than the first, as if something was wrong. I could have sworn I heard my dog barking as well. Annoyed but concerned, I got out, cracked the door open, and called back to them. But after waiting a few seconds, there was no response. I quickly dried myself off and put on my robe, then headed downstairs, asking what they needed. Again, no response. My dog was on her bed, fast asleep, and my brother was nowhere to be found. I looked out the window, and their car wasn't even there. This wasn't the first time my mind had decided to play these annoying games, so I didn't think much of it. Honestly, I've had auditory hallucinations before. None to that degree, but maybe they're getting worse and I need to sleep more. That was my way of trying to reason with myself, and it worked. The next time I heard my brother yell my name and they weren't there, I brushed it off. But then it happened the third time. And then a fourth, my brother calling for me loudly and distinctly. That's when I started to get worried. I thought I was genuinely going crazy. I decided to bring it up to my brother while we were playing Borderlands one night. We talked about our mental health a lot because our parents don't believe in therapy, so we kind of became each other's safe haven. I explained everything that had happened over the past month, and instead of giving advice or sympathizing like he usually does, he just got really quiet for a second. Then he said he'd been experiencing the same thing, except it was our mom yelling his name, but she was never home when he went to check. He said it had happened around 5 or 6 times, maybe a month or 2 ago, but he also thought his mind was playing tricks. It seemed after that talk, things began to stop. I didn't hear anything for almost 3 weeks, but then something happened that I'll never forget and will probably never have an explanation for. I was sitting in my bed in my room, scrolling through Instagram, when my mom starts aggressively calling my name from downstairs. I've never heard her voice like that before. It was always my brother's, so I didn't even think anything was weird at first. I was about to get up and see what she wanted when suddenly, my mom burst through the door, asking me what I wanted. I didn't know what to say, but I could tell she was annoyed by the look she gave me. She asked me again what I wanted, and I just kind of shook my head, trying to understand what was going on. Then, she angrily sighed and said not to yell her name while she was making dinner and walked out, leaving the door open. Still in shock, I got up to close the door, but as I walked across the room, my heart stopped when I came to the realization. I immediately sprinted over to the window and looked at the driveway. My mom was at work. I slammed my door shut and sat on my bed, crying as I called my brother. I was absolutely terrified and wanted to get out of the house, but I couldn't even get myself to go downstairs alone. My brother didn't pick up because he was at work, so I was left stuck there. I ended up locking myself in my small bathroom while I waited for either my brother or my mom to get home from work. But I knew it would be hours. Thankfully, nothing else happened until my mom got back. This time, I was very hesitant when she called for me, but it ended up being okay. I told my brother that night, and he said he'd never had anything like that happen to him. To this day, I still have no answers as to what I was hearing and seeing. But honestly, I'm writing this and sharing it in hopes of being able to forget about it and move on. I don't want to know anymore because I don't think I can handle the truth, if it really was paranormal.